An axe, a tool used to fell trees and split wood, but in pop culture associated with murder. From movies poking fun to The Lord of the Rings, American Psycho, the Salamanca twins in Breaking Bad, even Jason, and who can forget the iconic scene in The Shining. One needs only to look briefly and it becomes apparent that with axe murdering, art has imitated life. There is an impressive list of true-life axe murderers. Eva Dugan was born in 1878 in Missouri. She worked as a live-in housekeeper for Andrew Mathis. The two had a difficult relationship, often bickering. Mathis fired Dugan as he hated her cooking and was dissatisfied with her work. The next morning, Mathis disappeared along with some of his possessions. Dugan would be arrested and extradited to Arizona, where the crime had been committed. She is found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. In her final statement in court, she remarked, "Well, I'll die with my boots on and in full health, and that's more than most of you old coots will be able to boast on." On February 21, 1930, she is led to the gallows at 5 a.m. At 5:11, the jolt from the drop caused the rope to decapitate her. The head rolled in front of some spectators. Blood continued to squirt out of her neck for several minutes. 5 witnesses fainted. The Axeman of New Orleans was a serial killer from May 1918 to October 1919. During that time, the Axeman injured 6 and killed 6, usually with an axe, which often belonged to the victims. The attacker usually entered by removing the back doors of the victim's home and never removed any items. The majority of the victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans. Some media outlets suggested the mafia was involved. Another theory, due to a letter that was published in the newspapers, was it was a way to promote jazz music. In the letter, he writes, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I'm very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." The Axeman was never caught. Frankie Silver, born in North Carolina in 1814. She marries Charlie, and they have a daughter, Nancy, in 1830. They lived in a wooden cabin gifted by Charlie's father. Christmas 1831, Charlie goes missing while apparently out hunting. A search party could not find him. A man decides to search the cabin while Frankie was out. He finds bones in the fireplace and blood on the floor. The sheriff is called in, and the head of Charlie was found along with blood that flowed through the cabin floors and spatters on the wall. They concluded that on December 22, 1831, Charles was hacked to death with an axe. Frankie, her mother, and brother were all suspects, but only Frankie is charged and ultimately found guilty and sentenced to be hanged. It was theorized that she killed him as self-defense during a beating that she was receiving, but it was never proven. After her conviction, she is broken out of the jail. She is arrested 7 days later, heading to Tennessee, walking behind her father's wagon. The story is as follows. Her family broke her out of jail, cut her hair short, and dressed her in men's clothes. A sheriff's posse found them trying to make their getaway in a hay wagon. Frankie was in the hay until she was out of sight. She then walked beside the wagon. Someone in the posse yelled to her, "Frankie." She called back to him in a deep voice, "I thank you, sir, but my name is Tommy." Her uncle then added, "Yeah, her name's Tommy." Saying her gave them away, so back to jail she went. Frankie was hanged on Friday, July 12, 1833. She is believed to be the first woman executed in North Carolina. The most notable of all axe murder cases has to be that of Lizzie Borden. She is born in 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her father, Andrew, struggled financially as a young man, even though he was a descendant of wealth and influence. He eventually prospered through the manufacturing and sales of furniture, caskets. He later becomes a property developer, director of several mills, and he owned considerable commercial property. 3 years after the death of Lizzie's mother, Andrew married Abby Gray. Lizzie believed she married her father for his money. In the months leading up to the death of Lizzie's father and stepmother, tensions had grown due to her father giving away considerable gifts to Abby's relatives. On the morning of August 4th, 1892, Abby was killed on the second floor of the home. According to forensics, she was facing the attacker and struck on the side of the head with a hatchet. She spun and fell face first. Her killer delivered 17 more hits to the back of her head. All this occurred while Andrew was out for a walk. When he gets home around 10:30, he lays down to take a nap on the downstairs sofa. At 11:10, Lizzie calls for Maggie, the live-in housemaid. "Maggie, come quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." Andrew was struck 10 or 11 times with a hatchet-like weapon. During the investigation, Lizzie's answers to the officers' questions was contradictory and strange. Police did not check Lizzie for bloodstains and did not search her room properly. They found 2 hatchets, 2 axes, and a hatchet head with a broken handle in the basement. They did not remove them from the house as evidence. The next day, the police did a better search of the house, inspecting the clothing and confiscating the hatchet head. Lizzie was informed that she was a suspect, and during the inquest, she was not allowed to have an attorney present. She was on a prescription of morphine to calm her nerves, which may have affected her testimony. Lizzie would go to trial. The prosecutors were not able to convincingly demonstrate that the axe head was the murder weapon. After an hour and a half, the jury acquitted Lizzie. There is a long list of axe murderers beyond the notable ones highlighted here thus far. In 1828, the ship named Mary Russell returned to Ireland from Barbados. On board, the 7 crewmen had been brutally murdered by the ship's captain with an axe and crowbar. There is the Smutty Nose Island murder, the Harlson family murders, the Servant Girl Annihilator serial killer, also known as the Austin Axe murders, the Meeks family murders, Troy Axe murders, the 1909 Savannah Axe murders, the Ardenwald Axe murders, Buffalo Narrows murders, and Paul Mueller, who traveled through the U.S. from 1898 to 1912. His style of killing possibly links him to other murders. And the list goes on and on. When you invest the time researching all these axe murders, you almost forget the axe is a tool used to acquire lumber for building and wood for heat. That perfect wedge design of just a few pounds of iron or steel allows us to drop trees 40, 50 feet tall, weighing thousands of pounds. It certainly has no problem cutting through skin and bones. But the axe has a very strong historical connection in the United States, going all the way back to the colonies. As early as 1619, European investors sent master iron workers to the colonies. Iron was found in the New World from Virginia to Massachusetts, from New York and New Jersey to Connecticut. Pennsylvania, my home state, led the colonies and then the nation in iron production due to the abundance of iron ore deposits and the supporting availability of forests, limestone deposits, and rivers for providing power. I run into evidence of this as I research places to metal detect. Maps from the 1800s show locations where iron ore had been excavated, and forges still exist, like this one at Pine Grove Furnace State Park, and this one in my hometown of Boiling Springs. These furnaces were manned 365 days a year, often overlooked by the ironmaster or owner of the ironworks. Many men, some indentured servants and some slaves, were needed to keep an operation running at full stop. The furnaces relied on extreme heat to be able to refine the ore, heat that couldn't be generated from raw wood, but rather charcoal. And thus a team of men were needed to generate the charcoal by creating mounds of wood and building controlled fires that let the wood turn to the charcoal without burning to ash. And to make all that charcoal, a lot of wood was needed. An average of 1 acre of wood was used each day to keep the furnaces going. A football field is 1.32 acres to put this into perspective. This wood would need to be felled, cut, and split, then turned into charcoal. This wood and charcoal needed to be transported from the area where it was cut down to the charcoal mounds, then to the furnaces. This was a non-stop operation. The people that owned ironworks needed enough land to cut down 1 acre a day for 365 days. It took up to 10 years for growth to come back enough to start the process all over again. These axes were a part of that process, and in some ways represented the process in full circle. They were used to provide the fuel needed to make the iron, which in part could be used to make more axes. And I find these axes usually in farm fields, maybe from the iron industry, more than likely just used by a farmer to split wood for heating their home. It seems each time I find an axe, it is different than the others I have found. It turns out there are many types of axes, often named after a state or region where it was designed, or the particular style lent itself most useful for the trees in that region. Some types of axes include Maine, Kentucky, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Long Island, just to name a few. When I look at my beat-up old axes, I usually can't tell the type they are, as some types look very much the same to me. To be honest, I was never that fond of finding axes in the past. Finding one meant I needed to haul it out. There are days when I'm a mile or more away from my car, and sometimes that walk is in a river or creek. When I'm on a permission I know I'll be back to, it's in my best interest to take them with me. I try my best to really clean up an area when I detect. That helps me find more of the good items. A few of these axes came from one location. This is just a simple hatchet. It's broken where the handle would have been inserted. This is what I would consider a more typical axe. If I had to guess, I'd say it's a Connecticut style. I really don't know what is going on with this axe. Maybe it has a very specific purpose. I would guess it is purely for splitting wood. And how does an axe head take so much abuse as this one? I don't know what fight it got into, but it lost for sure. And here is my favorite axe. I found this in a river. Let me take you back to that day. All right. Mike and I moved on to another location. We've been here several times. Yeah, I just pulled this really slick double axe head. Yeah, that thing is cool. It won't be so cool to carry it with me, but I think I have to take this home because I have a couple other axe heads. This thing is neat. And surprisingly, it's not that tarnished. I mean, the one side is a little bit here, but yeah. Well, let's throw it in the pouch and carry it on out. Ugh. This double bit axe head would have had one side sharpened a bit more to be used to fell trees, and the other side slightly duller for splitting wood. The double bit design makes it more steady to swing, yet more dangerous at the same time. You can see that it has been cleaned up since it had been pulled from the river. The cleaning process revealed what I believe to be layers of the steel. You can see the darker spots right on the edges, as well as in some of the deeper pits. Perhaps it was used to fuel an ever-hungry furnace. The lumberjacks would have filed and sharpened it so often in the non-stop pursuit of felling wood that in time it would break down and no longer be of use. Or perhaps it was used near the river's edge, and a hard-driven swing would split a weakened handle, sending the blade into the river. Unable to be located at the time, the handle would rot away. The metal would sink a little into the mud, which actually protects it from rusting away. And I swing a detector over the spot in which it rests for 150 or so years, and I get a signal, and from the signal, I get a story.